The fifth generation of video game consoles revolutionized gaming forever. One huge thing it did is it took classic characters like Mario, Link, and Snake, swapped those pixels for polygons, and dropped them in 3D environments. Out of this generation also came new faces like Crash Bandicoot, Lara Croft, Chris Redfield, or Spyro, that would go on to become household names in their own right. My favorite, amongst the piles of unforgettable new titles and IPs, is Twisted Metal, more specifically Twisted Metal 2. I have already covered Twisted Metal 1 in a previous video, so if you're interested, consider checking that out. But Twisted Metal 2 was released in November 1996 and developed by SingleTrack. The PlayStation version alone sold 1.74 million copies in the United States, so if you remember playing Twisted Metal on PS1, it was more than likely Twisted Metal 2. 2 years after its release, Twisted Metal 2 was re-released as a PlayStation Greatest Hits game, this time under developer 989 Studios instead of SingleTrack. That's why some of your copies will have that awesome 989 Studios logo crawl at the start. And in case you're wondering, mine is an original SingleTrack version. Most critics of the time praised the game as an overall improvement when compared to the original, due to its larger, more intricate levels and better graphics, which I tend to agree with, mostly. Next Generation wrote that Twisted Metal 2 shows significant improvement with sharper textures, a significant reduction in clipping, and even an improved frame rate. GamePro stated that intense gameplay is what saves and makes the game, especially in the two-player head-to-head mode. A critic at Electronic Gaming Monthly stated, "I wasn't all that crazy about the first Twisted Metal, but this sequel is worlds better, even though it looks like the same old thing at a first glance." But does Twisted Metal 2 still live up to the legend, or is it just nostalgia clouding our judgment? Let's find out. Does anyone remember Twisted Metal 2? A strong case can be made as to why Twisted Metal 2 is the best game in the franchise. Where Twisted Metal 1 was a solid proof of concept, Twisted Metal 2 is the foundation that everything after it was built on. It took everything from the first game, improved it, and added more features. As a matter of fact, most of the features and changes implemented in Twisted Metal 2 remain staples of the series, even today. The first of many major improvements Twisted Metal 2 made over its predecessor is that the narrative is now conveyed through comic book style cutscenes and actual voice actors.
Exactly 1 year ago on Christmas Eve, my Twisted Metal contest destroyed the City of Angels.
Gone are those boring text crawls, thank God. With that said, the plot of Twisted Metal 2 is more or less the same. Taking place 1 year after the events of the first game, Calypso puts on a tournament granting the winner anything their hearts desire. But his real goal is to cause damage and sow chaos in order to harvest the souls of the innocent. The major difference this year is that the Twisted Metal tournament isn't confined to the streets of LA. Instead, it's going worldwide. From Moscow to Holland, from Paris to Hong Kong, nowhere is safe, and Calypso is, once again, the architect of the tournament. Only this time he's running it from the comfort of a blimp, as opposed to the sewer he was dwelling in during the first game. Calypso has also received a facelift, no pun intended, greatly improving his overall design and look. He now looks more normal with long sleek hair, and the burns on his face have been toned down a lot. Now his face looks less like a cow patty and more like a burnt face. How these games tie into one another can get a bit confusing. So you choose your character and finish the game, right? So that's your ending. But each of the games seem to have their own official ending, which in Twisted Metal 1, according to the story, crowns Carl Roberts, or Outlaw, as the official winner, who then gets blasted into space, prompting the driver of Outlaw 2 to join with the wish to find him. But here's the thing, these same parameters can be applied in a few other scenarios. For example, Captain Spears, the original driver of Roadkill, doesn't return in this game, leading to the assumption that he won last year and got his wish to go back in time to save his platoon, getting killed in the process. Another example is Spectre. The original driver, Scott Campbell, got his wish to be alive again after being murdered. He then returns home to his family, so it makes sense that he wouldn't want to join up again for Twisted Metal 2. After spending way too long going down a rabbit hole scouring forums and wiki pages, I've reached the conclusion that there really is no singular official winner, at least not in Twisted Metal 1 or 2. The stories, characters, and vehicles all tie into one another, some more loosely than others, but in most cases, this insane jigsaw puzzle often makes the most sense if you look at the stories of the cars more so than the drivers. There are theories out there that Twisted Metal 1 and 2 take place inside Marcus Kane's head. I don't buy these. Maybe I missed something, but I've seen no concrete proof of this in either game, and the reasoning behind these theories can be easily explained away in one of two ways. People live through each game because each game ends differently based off who you play as. Thus, the sequels seem to treat it as if every driver is a winner. But I think it's left ambiguous on purpose. Some drivers change while their cars remain. And the other way to explain these theories away is that it's a video game. It could have simply come down to design choice. If they had chosen a definitive winner, say Outlaw, then Twisted Metal 2 would have needed a completely new roster aside from Outlaw 2. But why create a whole new roster when most of the current lineup is solid? Sometimes it just doesn't make sense, and sometimes it doesn't need to. And if you really look at Twisted Metal 1, I don't think it was ever intended to have a super involved story. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go over the levels. And side note, I've always loved the little globe that shows you the next level. I know it's a very minuscule detail, I've just always thought it was super cool. But the first stop of the tournament is Quake Zone Rumble. Taking place in LA, this level is made up of a large open area in the middle with a highway loop wrapping around it, featuring a few ramps and upper areas, as well as a small caged room across a narrow bridge, and of course, you can never go wrong with a pit of fire. It's a simple level, but very fun, and as far as first levels go, it's definitely a step up over Arena Duel. Next is Moscow, or Suicide Slide. This level is a very small octagonal arena featuring destructible raised pathways jutting out over a bowl in the middle. I mean, blowing up the elevated pathways is pretty cool, but beyond that, there's not much else to say about this level. Moving on. Paris, or Monumental Disaster, is the quintessential level of this game, maybe even the genre. It's the level everyone seems to remember, and it's even on the front cover of the game. The level itself is simply a few blocks of Paris with a canal running through it separating the city from the Eiffel Tower, which obviously you can blow up. Doing this sends pieces of the Eiffel Tower flying and the rest of it toppling over, opening up the rooftops to you. Overall, it's an amazing level with its verticality and layout, and of course, the unforgettable gimmick. Unfortunately, after the monumental success that was Paris, see what I did there? We have Firewalk. And this level is simply a ring of platforms with a few temples dotted around and a small island a ways away from the ring. Oh, and all of this is situated in a sea of lava. I'll be completely honest with you, I hate this level. When I started this series on the Twisted Metal games, I was particularly not excited for this level. I mean, credit where it's due, Firewalk is wicked in concept, but in practice, it's an absolute nightmare. The main ring is where most early match fights happen, but the AI seem to mostly bunch up either on the island or in the lava close to the island. Now of course, the lava itself does damage you, but the damage is minuscule enough that it's not a massive deal, at least for the vehicles I use. Firewalk repeats for the mid-game boss fight against returning character Minion, and I will say, everything about this fight sucks. First off, it takes place on Firewalk, so I'm already not a fan, and second, they made him way more powerful than the first game. His attacks decimate a third of your health in one hit, and he's ultra tanky, which again, makes sense as he's a tank. But man, I'm not ashamed to say, it took me 3 tries to get past him. One strategy I thought would work was banking all my specials and luring him into the underground tunnel. Well, as you can see, it didn't work out too well with Shadow, but Thumper on the other hand made quick work of him with the old 1-2 punch. If you don't know, it's where you freeze enemies as Thumper and unload your specials on them at once. One thing to note is if you're playing on easy mode, this is where your journey ends. I initially went through on easy as Warthog just to get footage and such, only to be reunited with my old friend, the anti-bitch barrier, and this time it actually insulted me. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, why have an easy mode for the story if you can't beat the story on easy mode? So, while getting back to Firewalk on normal difficulty, one thing became very clear. This game is way more difficult than Twisted Metal 1, and the difficulty only piles on from here, because the next level is the Big Leap. And it's called the Big Leap because it takes place on the rooftops of some New York skyscrapers, thus introducing pitfalls, and naturally they're everywhere. It also doesn't help that most of this level is made up of narrow ramps and paths, so you're constantly one button slip away from falling to your death. At first, this was very frustrating, but once I got the feel of it, I started to really enjoy the absolute intensity of this level. See, you're always close to falling, but so are your enemies, which can make for some funny moments, and if you're strategic about it, you can coax AI into falling to their death. On the other hand, the big leap is where I really started to notice that this game controls a bit worse than Twisted Metal 1, which had more snappy responsive controls, while this game feels sluggish and floaty in comparison. Turning and maneuvering in tight spots can be a major crutch during gameplay. This is most notable when going through portals, which seem to always place you facing a random direction, adding the fact that they're mostly always situated in small rooms, meaning you have to slowly reorient your car towards the exit, leaving you open to a hit or two. Thankfully, this is the last level that features narrow paths like this. And speaking of which, next up is the drop zone. Taking place on a glacier in Antarctica, this is another very flat open level, with a few raised platforms or crevasse to fight in and hunks of ice just jutting out along the horizon. But most notably, this level has one of, if not the most amazing level concept I've ever seen in these types of games. Periodically, portions of the glacier will actually break off and fall into the frigid waters below, all while you're still fighting on top of them. It's just pure insanity. Jumping off a falling piece at the very last moment, leaving an enemy to fall in your place is heart-pounding and really fun. This falling chunks gimmick makes this the most memorable level for me by far. On that topic, a good cheese method is to stock up on ricochets and warp to the island and just hit enemies as they warp, sending them flying off the edge. Cheap? Yes, but this game is cheap too, so I'll allow it. After Antarctica, we have Holland. And it's just an open field with a few windmills. It's absolutely insane though. I spawned in and died in 20 seconds. If you don't keep moving, you won't survive. One thing I have noticed is that half the AI always seem to congregate in the back corner by the windmill. Now this isn't a huge issue, as fighting them all at once would make this level even more unforgiving than it already is. I do really like the effect you see when driving through the tall grass, but aside from that, it's just a flat rectangle. Hong Kong, however, is quite the contrast. It's comprised of a few neon-drenched city blocks with a large temple on one end and a marina on the other. And circling around the outside is a monorail tunnel. Hong Kong repeats not only once, but twice for the two-stage boss fight against the massive ice cream truck that is Darktooth. And he's very tanky and dishes out boatloads of damage. You can't take him head on, so a good strategy is needed. What I did is I went up into the monorail tunnels to arm up, then I'd pop out, throw everything I had at him, then retreat back to the tunnels and do it again. Darktooth can't actually fit in the tunnels. All he can do is shoot these very easily avoidable clown bombs at you, and even doing this, you're still in for a good fight. The second and final stage is a fight against the bobblehead that was on top of Darktooth itself. In this phase, he's a lot less tanky, but very fast and relentless in his attacks. If on the off chance you've never played this game but have played Rogue Trip, Darktooth is a lot like Nightshade in those regards. So that covers all the single player levels, and as I've mentioned above, every level features destruction in some form or another. I've already talked about destroying the Eiffel Tower and the falling chunks in Antarctica. Even though it's not due to player intervention, I still count it. But there are many more examples. For instance, you can shoot the Statue of Liberty on New York, revealing it to be wearing a bathing suit, then shoot it again to destroy it. Or you can blow up the temples on Amazonia to reveal rooms with pickups and even a tunnel. These elements, in my opinion, are amazing. They really lend the world space some dynamics, which is always good in my books. That being said, Twisted Metal 2's levels are definitely more interesting than those of the first game, but looking at them objectively, Quake Zone Rumble, Suicide Slide, Firewalk, Antarctica, and Holland are all, at their base, open arenas with very little cover. Now, I'm not saying Twisted Metal 2's more open arenas are terrible by any means, they still ooze personality and they can be fun, but I'm also not saying they're the best either. For example, Holland would have been a lot less annoying if either the maps were larger or there were less enemies, because cramming 10 of us in an arena that size is a bit chaotic and unbalanced. On the flip side, I think my favorite level from a gameplay standpoint would have to be Paris. It just has the perfect balance of elements: tight corridors, open areas, and verticality. It perfectly caters to all playstyles, making it, in my opinion, the strongest level in the game. So we've looked at all the levels, now it's time for the cars and characters. Twisted Metal 2 features a slightly expanded, slightly different roster of characters than the previous game, with 14 characters in total, well 15 if you count Darktooth, which I don't. But the first thing to note when looking at the roster is that Yellow Jacket, Crimson Fury, Pit Viper, and Darkseid have all been cut and replaced by new characters. First, let's go over all the returning vehicles and their changes. And Roadkill is first on the list. This time around, it's driven by Marcus Kane. His wish is to wake up from his dream. Yeah, he's not all there, but it's Twisted Metal, so really who is? Roadkill is one of 7 returning playable vehicles, and it got a redesign too, swapping out the rusted brown-gray color palette for a more sleek red look. Unfortunately, Roadkill has also had some stat changes. He now fits into the middle of the road category with all of his stats getting bumped down 1 or 2 points, and his special has been changed to an explosive boomerang with the gimmick of dealing more damage on its return journey. Hammerhead is now driven by Mike and Stu, who wish for the ability to fly. Spoiler alert, it doesn't quite work out for them. Hammerhead itself is more or less the same in function, being a massive, heavily armored monster truck. You will want to keep your distance, as Hammerhead's special also remains unchanged, simply crushing enemies under its massive wheels. Appearance-wise, Hammerhead got a substantial redesign. The green pickup truck chassis has been swapped out for a black Suburban body with red flame and skull decals on the sides and hood. Hammerhead is also notoriously unwieldy in this game, he just bumps around everywhere. Outlaw 2 is driven by Captain Jamie Roberts, the sister of Carl Roberts, Outlaw's original driver. Her wish is, as you may have guessed, to find her brother. Stats-wise, Outlaw 2 is faster than the original Outlaw, but less armored. Its special weapon is the same, a taser that spins and latches onto an enemy, dealing moderate damage. In terms of Outlaw 2's appearance, it's still very much a cop car, only more sporty. The reason I've lumped Outlaw 2 in with the returning vehicles is because this iteration is basically the same in function as its predecessor. Next up is Warthog. Warthog is driven by Captain Rogers, a US war vet who simply wishes for his youth back. Being a war vet, his special is awfully fitting. He fires 3 homing missiles colored red, white, and blue that deal more damage the longer they fly. In Twisted Metal 2, Warthog is slightly faster, but beyond that his stats remain the same. The same can be said for Warthog's overall design, which remains largely unchanged. Mr. Grimm is once again driven by Mr. Grimm. His wish is for people to start killing one another to satisfy a soul addiction. The bike itself is the same from Twisted Metal 1, aside from the addition of a sidecar in a red color scheme. And just like in Twisted Metal 1, Mr. Grimm is a very fast glass cannon sporting the most deadly special in the game, which is a non-homing death spawn or skull. Out of all the vehicles on offer, Mr. Grimm takes the most skill to be successful with. Thumper is driven again by Bruce, and this time his wish is to be king of the world. Thumper itself is pretty much the same, with the only difference being the color of the roof changing to white. And compared to the last game, he loses points on his armor, speed, and special, but his ultra flamethrower is still stupidly powerful, able to wipe anyone out aside from bosses in 2 simultaneous uses. And the final returning vehicle is Spectre, driven by Ken Masters, who wishes to be world famous. Spectre got a bump in speed, but beyond that his stats remain unchanged, as does his special, which is still a ghost missile that passes through walls. Visually, Spectre's car model is slightly different, with a new color scheme changed from silver to white with blue stripes. And that about covers the returning playable vehicles and their changes. Now on to the new additions. First up is Twister, driven by Amanda Watts, who wishes to drive at the speed of light? Okay, I mean, sure. Twister is a very fast and nimble F1 race car with low armor. Another glass cannon on par with Mr. Grimm. Twister's highlight is her special, and I gotta say, this special is awesome. She flips up onto her nose and starts spinning, turning her car into a twister, lifting anyone close by up into the air and tossing them around for a while. Probably one of the most interesting and out there vehicle designs of the entire series is Axel. And just like Mr. Grimm, Axel shares the name of its driver, who wishes for the strength to confront his father, who actually turns out to be a real piece of work. The vehicle itself consists of a man strapped between 2 monstrous wheels. In stats-wise, Axel is pretty average. His special is a shockwave emanating from underneath the contraption itself, capable of sending other contestants flying through the air. Mr. Slam appears as a heavily modified and armored wheel loader driven by Simon Whittlebone, a disgruntled architect who wishes to build the world's tallest tower. Mr. Slam is slow with loads of armor and a powerful special, which grabs other cars in its deadly jaws, slamming them against the ground repeatedly. This and Twister's special are 2 of the most badass unique specials in the entire game. Shadow is driven by Mortimer, who wishes to exact revenge on Calypso. With low armor, moderate speed, and a powerful special, this ghoulish hearse is a solid middle-of-the-road option. And speaking of his special, he fires a non-homing ghost that travels along the ground. This special is one of the only 2-stage specials in the entire game. When the ghost reaches an enemy, you have to manually detonate it underneath them for maximum damage. And finally, Grasshopper, driven by Krista Sparks. Her wish is to be reunited with her father, who, spoiler alert, just so happens to be Calypso himself. With low armor, moderate speed, and a weak special, I don't really know why anyone would choose her. I mean, I guess her special is kinda cool. You leap into the air and slam down on enemies, causing damage similar to that of a power missile, maybe a little less. Grasshopper is, in a way, the spiritual successor to Pit Viper from the first game. This can be proven by looking at Grasshopper's texture file. Not only is Pit Viper's texture in there, but her Acid Spit special is too. The reason I don't include the next and final 3 in the playable characters section is because you need to use cheats to unlock them. Now if they were, say, secrets or rewards for beating the game, then that would be a different story. But as it stands, there's no way to obtain them organically, so I don't include them, even though they are technically playable in their own ways. Returning from Twisted Metal 1, Minion appears on the Amazonia level as the mid-game boss, and he's more or less the same in appearance. In Twisted Metal 2, however, Minion is actually playable through the use of cheats, and as you may have guessed, his stats are all 4s and 5s, making him the best vehicle in the game. Minion's wish is to exact revenge on Calypso for stealing his powers, and from what I can tell, his special is a combination of a freeze missile and a more powerful version of Warthog's special. After Minion is Darktooth, and he's Twisted Metal 2's final boss. I don't include Darktooth in the overall count of playable characters because, on original hardware, you need a game chart or a cheat disk to unlock him, and even then, it causes glitches and crashing. Darktooth is essentially Sweet Tooth in design, but scaled up with a more detailed bobblehead and a new color scheme. Darktooth is black with purple dots, while Sweet Tooth is white with pink dots. I remember seeing Darktooth for the first time as a kid and being completely awestruck. His design is just so out of left field and insane yet oddly fitting, but I guess that's the whole point of these games now, isn't it? And last but certainly not least, we have the demonic ice cream truck Sweet Tooth, returning in all its splendor. And to my extreme dismay, you can't play as Sweet Tooth organically right off the hop, but the design of Sweet Tooth is mostly the same as the last game. Unlike its driver Needles Kane, who received quite a substantial redesign, adding that trademark flaming head we all know and love. Needles takes on more of a sad, sinister clown look in this game. He now actually looks like someone you should fear as opposed to the corner store crackpot. His wish is to become a bug in a field to escape his madness? I mean, I would say that's stupid, but it's Sweet Tooth. And this wish is much more imaginative than his wish in the last game, where he wished to be reunited with Crazy Harold the Wacky Lunch Sack. That's not an analogy either, it's a brown paper bag named Harold. One thing I really struggled with in this game was finding a character I genuinely enjoyed playing. In the first game, Sweet Tooth was great, but then I played as Roadkill, and that vehicle just really fit well with my playstyle. But in this game, I just didn't feel as though there were any options that felt that good to me. Plus, with the way some of these levels are designed, slow tanky vehicles are more of a crutch than anything else, and fast cars are very unwieldy. And I'm not saying these vehicles are bad in any way, they all fit a certain playstyle, just none of them really fit mine. That being said, I didn't totally hate Thumper or Warthog. So let's go over the weapons on offer here. One thing to note is that pickups are no longer presented as small pink bubbles on the ground. They've been changed to large floating icons with clear text under them, which is great because now you can easily discern what you're actually picking up. In Twisted Metal 1, there were so many times where I really needed a weapon and I thought I was grabbing a fire missile or something, but instead I ended up getting a freeze missile, which kinda sucked. As is standard with these games, every car has a machine gun, and of course there's always the trusty Twisted Metal trio, consisting of the fire, homing, and power missiles. In case you're unfamiliar, the homing missile is the weakest of the 3, but homes in the best. The fire missile deals more damage, but isn't nearly as nimble as the homing missile. And finally, the power missile. It deals the most damage of the 3, but doesn't home in at all. Then, the ricochet. This weapon appears as a large bomb and looks like it was stolen straight out of Looney Tunes. Along with blowing up and damaging whoever it hits, it also sends them flying, which makes these amazing on levels with pitfalls or tight corridors all the same. One thing I've noticed is that if you fire the ricochet while boosting or driving a fast car like Mr. Grimm or Twister, you can drive into it after you've fired it, damaging you in the process. The remote bomb is simply a remote bomb. You plant it, then blow it up when someone drives by. In this game, remote bombs are quite powerful. If you freeze enemies and place one right on them, it deals very high damage. This method is very good for taking out Minion or Darktooth easily. Napalm is this game's mortar weapon, If you've watched my road trip video, you'll know how I feel about these guns, and if you haven't seen the video, you should check it out. But long story short, I don't like mortar type weapons in these games. I can never reliably use them, and in my opinion, a missile is always better. Now I understand that mortar weapons typically deal more damage than your standard missiles, but I find it easier with the fire and forget mechanics of the missile. The lightning pickup is a new addition to the series, but it's only usable on certain levels, and only effective in a few areas on said levels. But it deals good damage and acts as a great option to chip away at the health of enemies without actually exposing yourself to damage. This pickup would feature in Twisted Metal 3 and 4, but for Twisted Metal Black and Head On it was changed to the environmental attack. In my Twisted Metal 1 video, I mentioned that a lot of those weapons would go on to become sub-weapons or energy attacks. And unlike typical weapons, these don't come in the form of pickups. Instead, they're activated via button codes and are only limited by how much energy you have. You have the Freeze Burst, Homing Napalm, High Jump, Energy Shield, Rear Attack, Drop Mine, Invisibility Cloak, Rear Freeze, and Rear Napalm. All of them do exactly as their names suggest. However, there are two more weirder codes you can use. The first is Minion Special, which allows you to, use Minion Special at the cost of energy. And the second is Sell Your Soul. This code takes all your weapons, giving you health in return. The more weapons you have, the more health you'll get. With only 6 main weapons, you'd think your arsenal would feel sparse, but adding all the energy attacks into the mix opens up many more methods in which to dispatch your enemies. Once you get good with them, it kinda feels like you're playing Mortal Kombat with all its combos. Kinda. But success in Twisted Metal 2 is very dependent on your knowledge and use of these energy attacks. I personally struggled a lot with the game until I realized just how integral they are, especially the Freeze Burst, Rear Attack, and Shield. You don't leave home without those 3. I don't usually touch on multiplayer in these videos, but there are 2 multiplayer modes, Challenge Match and Co-op Tournament. Challenge Match is simply a 1v1. Not a whole lot to say about this mode. You select your cars, your level, and duke it out. Co-op Tournament is, the story, but in co-op. This mode is where the multiplayer really shines. There's just something so wicked about playing through the story with a friend. But seeing as this is just split screen story mode, there isn't much to say that I haven't already. One thing I did notice, however, is that every time one player dies, the game kinda resets. Player and AI positions reset, player health resets, but not AI health. Weird. One thing's for sure though, the multiplayer is insanely fun in Twisted Metal 2, so if you have this game and a friend, I highly recommend giving it a whirl. Just bust out the Mountain Dew and Doritos and live like it's the 90s again. Now I'd be doing the game a major disservice if I didn't touch on the music. I think one of the many amazing elements to Twisted Metal 2 is its soundtrack. All the songs exude this awesome heavy metal feel, most of them incorporating sirens, car horns, tire screeches, people screaming, stuff like that perfectly mesh with the feel of the game. But there are a few that stand out above the rest. The main theme, being an improved and updated version of the same theme from the previous game, is just chef's kiss. Accompanying this is the menu theme, a more subdued version of the same song. This one gives off the feeling that it's the calm before the storm, or it's a build-up. It's utter perfection. The themes for LA and Paris are also standout tracks. The LA theme has an incredible amount of drive to it, and a very catchy guitar riff. It's absolutely fantastic, and even better that they put it in the first level, pulling you right in. And the Paris theme is an awesome heavy metal cover of the French nursery rhyme Frère Jacques. I know I'm probably saying that wrong, I don't care, fight me. This and the main theme have got to be the 2 best songs in the entire game, hands down. So, Twisted Metal 2 remains one of my all-time favorites, and after playing a boatload of it for this video, I can easily say that it remains every bit as legendary as I remembered. During my time revisiting Twisted Metal 2, I've enjoyed its ups, cursed its downs, and celebrated every triumph. And I've been reminded why Twisted Metal 2 received so much critical acclaim. It's an exceptional game, very difficult but exceptional. The soundtrack, the sounds, the cars, the levels, the vibrance, the chaos, the speed, everything all come together to create this awesome concoction of just balls to the wall action. And I can't sing this game's praises enough. Even with my criticisms, it's still an amazing game. But what about all of you? Did you remember Twisted Metal 2? If so, who's your favorite driver? And what's your favorite level? Let's talk about it. And if you feel I've earned your subscription, I would love to have it. I'm trying to reach 1,000, so anything helps. And finally, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.